got you on here now. Finally got you on here. How are you doing?
Hi, Stephen. Doing well. Doing well.
Yeah, you were definitely one of the ones I wanted to have on for a while, but we needed to coordinate that. You guys are so busy.
Yeah, everybody's schedule's kind of getting packed these days.
Yeah, tell me about that. Like, what? I mean, what is the next? So, I mean, you guys are booked up for till when?
Actually, so we planned ahead as a C3PO. We knew this was coming, right? It's written
Mhm.
written down and published
Yeah,
about what the expectations are for OSCs seeking level 2 certification, and just even the support that they'll require getting there.
yeah.
And pretty soon we'll be able to support um, 16 assessments a month based off the teams we have. So we're waiting for OSCs to be ready and come to us and get through it.
So you would agree with the general disposition that the bottleneck isn't really the CCA assessment team formulation. It's just people being ready.
I think that's where we are right now.
Yeah.
If all the OSCs that could potentially come through and ask to be level 2 certified, that would probably become a bottleneck. But
Yeah.
I don't see it being the case as we stand currently.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's what I'm hearing too. Is like people just need to get ready. Do you feel like people that are seemingly ready and getting scheduled um, are large in part actually ready from what you guys are seeing? I'm just curious what you guys are seeing right now. It's March 24th when we're recording this, so I'm just curious at this stage in phase one, what are you guys looking at and seeing?
So I think, but can we step out a little bit and discuss this? Um, the where we were last year this time were OSCs ready to go and jump into the CMC level 2 assessment process. What we mostly saw was that they were not ready,
Mm,
and it's because the understanding of what the requirements were based off of their understanding of 171, NIST 800 SP 800 171,
yeah,
maybe not even understanding NIST SP 800 171 alpha, right, the assessment objectives,
right,
or being confused between um, DIBCAC method of going through an assessment or proposed rules, and how the expectations were presented in a 1 year long draft version of a proposed rule, or the actual execution of the final rule when it was published. And so there was a lot of confusion, and what we saw was OSCs coming to the table not ready because of that confusion, and they were, most of them were fully under the impression that they were ready to go.
yeah,
However, as a C3PO and lead CCAs, and we spent a lot of time understanding what the requirements were, and
right.
we had a lot of
It was
difficult
your life.
conversations. Right?
Yeah,
With this, it's what I do, right?
yeah, that's what we do.
And so we had a lot of difficult conversations, and saw a lot of delays. I think a lot of those delays have dropped from the OSCs, the amount of delays, I guess, percentage wise.
Yeah,
Even when we go to the increase of OSCs that are presenting themselves to be ready for assessment, just a percentage, right? So we may see more delays, but it's a smaller percentage wise.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. We
and
still see it.
right, right, and I think so. Something we have taken on as a task, as as I guess good representatives of the CMMC community, as a C3PO, is the best way we can identify readiness is through early communications, an early screening process, right? And we are afforded that opportunity with the way the CAP is written, the
Right.
CMC assessment process, right? And that's again published by the Cyber AB. It's it's a general guidelines on how to perform assessments, but there are some hard requirements in there.
Yeah.
But one of it allows it throughout the preliminary phase where they have framing opportunity and scoping opportunity. That gives us the ability to not start the assessment and still identify the things we need to identify. And
Yeah.
in those cases where we can't, right, we don't agree on scope, or we don't agree on categorization, or they cannot explain it, or things that they need to explain,
Right.
those can be the delays before the assessment starts, right?
Mm.
So I believe I'm seeing overall is that C3POs are developing better processes to inform OSCs of their readiness when they come to the table, so we're not wasting time and money on the OSC side or time on the C3PO side when it actually matters.
Yeah, and I think it's never going to be perfect because every situation's different. I mean, we just had one that had to get rescheduled just because of nuance changes, and yeah, I totally see it. I totally see it. But I agree with you that of the people that we've talked to, of the experience we've heard from other CCAs that are doing assessments and not just consulting, it does seem like more and more people are actually ready for this, which is a positive, right? Because I agree with you, that was not how it felt a year ago.
Well, and so this conversation we're having right now, I love these conversations
Yeah,
because this is free guidance, and it's a way to broadcast it
yeah,
to all the OSCs that are paying attention, that want to learn, that want to do well. And
yeah,
there's many great opportunities out there and really knowledgeable folks that are getting on these platforms and speaking. Now, not everything being presented is accurate from everybody, but I've also seen really quickly how the knowledgeable folks will go behind them and say, well, here's some other things you can look at. Here's another way to look at it, or
yeah,
here's your interpretation is incorrect because, and then point to a resource. And I think that's really helping the environment, and we need it.
yeah. And the most in my opinion, I see that too. And the most helpful scenarios are when the knowledgeable people are doing that, um, not in a I'm going to break your kneecaps with this baseball bat kind of disposition, which I see that too. And it's like, that's not helpful either. Like, some people are genuinely trying to help, and they just, like, I've been wrong about things before, and some people have corrected me, and that's helped me learn, and people have been cordial about it. And, I'm here recently, I've kind of been on this, man, I just want people not to be so discouraged, and therefore, and because other people are being discouraging, but at the same time, yeah, we need the truth. We need accuracy. So it's that's kind of been a little bit of a hobby horse for me here recently. I don't know if you feel the same way, but
I do, and so if we go back to a few years ago before CMMC, right? If we just go back to NIST 800-171, and
yeah,
we were authorized as C3PO, but we performed NIST 800-171 assessments with DIBCAC,
right.
and
The
and
Dodam, yeah,
right, and we recognized that there was knowledge deficiencies, right, and that's one of the largest aspects that drew me to the organization I'm with now, Kieri Solutions, is that Amir Ahmad, right? She was the one that would get on and just I would watch videos that she would just get up in the middle. It looked like appeared that she would just get up in the middle of the night and make, right. Something was bugging her. She had a conversation, and she was like, "Well, no, that wasn't accurate, right?" Or somebody maybe she read something, that wasn't presented well. It's wrong. And she would just get up in the middle of the night and make a 2-hour video on what the right looked like.
sounds like a mirror.
You and
Yeah,
she's kind of out of the game now.
yeah,
She's doing some great things and helping folks and animals right now. But the the aspect of helping people still exists, right?
yeah.
And
What
and
she
I,
started, right? Yeah, yeah.
I
We love Amira. So we're so thankful for her. Well, I guess that leads me into some of the first things I wanted to ask you. You know, people are you're talking at conferences, you're active on LinkedIn. People are seeing you and seeing how you're involved in the ecosystem. And just like with everybody else that I have on here, I really want people to get to know you, because I think that not only bolsters trust, but um, it's just more availability for them to get better resources, right? Because the more they see you, the more resources, the more knowledge, the more experience that they're hearing from you. So I was just, one of the things I always like to start off is just let people learn about you on a personal level, so that you're not just talking head telling them things, right? So I mean, if you don't mind, I'd love to just hear how you grew up, where you grew up, those childhood, adolescent, and young adult experiences that led you to the person that you are today, that helps the people that you do today. If you don't mind sharing back that far.
Oh yeah, certainly. I think I had a fun, adventurous life. I grew up in southern Louisiana. I was a musician, and I dropped out of high school to run a production company, and I worked at studios, and I had a very music focused life. I ended up going to production school or audio
Wow.
engineering in Minneapolis. That school's now no longer existent. but it really set me up for a life in the military. So,
It sounds like it.
you know, after eating potatoes and and cheese bread because that's what I could afford, canned chicken, I was like, there has to be something better. But it taught me to be tough, right? It taught me to take risk, to be adventurous, to learn.
And be content with
Unfortunately,
it. Yeah.
the, the hard way is definitely the way I learned the best. And and so then I started a career in the military. Yeah, I think for most folks in the military, they plan to get in and get out. That was my intentions, and I ended up doing 24 years with those intentions.
Wow.
And even that experience was an adventure. I had multiple jobs. I was enlisted, I was commissioned, then I had two designators commissioned. But throughout that time, I was technically oriented, working on combat systems, and then this was sometimes the technology was from the 50s and 60s, so
Yep.
hard drive the size of a desk, and then we moved into networked architecture, and
Yeah.
so I got to learn a lot, and spent time teaching, and stationed all over the world, developed, grew a wonderful family, and spent 10 years on Guam. Absolutely loved the tropical paradise. If anybody ever gets a chance to go out there and experience that, it's worth the trip.
Yeah.
Um, and then but throughout the 24 years, ultimately it always was security centric.
Hmm.
Um, and I did take advantage of the education that I was offered throughout the military, and so and I always relayed it back to something I was doing. I was a military instructor for a while, teaching at the submarine school, and so I used that time to get an bachelor's degree in workforce education, and then went to go do more fun things, and came back eventually after I got commissioned to be the security officer. And I was like, well, I made this education, got a master's in information assurance, and just fell in love with the art of security, security and securing things and the challenges of every day of
Yeah.
people, the dynamic issues people present, and the ongoing uh, technology challenges of, all right, this is old, it doesn't do the job. What do I go next? How do I get money for it? How do I integrate it? All those things,
Right.
and then it was fun. That and a mixture of anti-terrorism work. So continuing on technical side and security, people, places, things, throughout the rest of my time, and it was just a blast. So I for a while I was trying to figure out what I'm going to do when I get out of the military, and I got brought on board just by happenstance to a prime contractor to help them with their CMMC and internal processes and compliance. I knew compliance. I knew RMF 853 plus a slew of other security frameworks. And when I was working with CMC, didn't know what it was, didn't know 80171, didn't have to use it in the government, right?
Right.
So I bought all the books and read everything, and I was like, this seems fun. And what's well, and the reason why is because I just told you I do things the hard way, right? And it
Yeah.
seemed like a challenge because everybody knew what they're talking about, but none of what people were saying was the same, right? So
Hmm.
especially at that time, we were going from CMC 1.0 to 2.0. And again, there was not really guidance on how to do things, just rules published by DIPCAC on how they did things, so their business practices. So I just wanted to learn and put all the pieces together. And that's when Amira kind of found me through LinkedIn and offered me a position. And at the time, I really wasn't sure who she was. And then I started digging into her stuff, and it's like, this is what I want to do. This is the right place for me. And ever since then, I haven't looked back. I feel like since joining Kieri, it's been such a great organization. I was myself and another gentleman were the first W-2 employees at the time, and we've grown significantly. And what I've been allowed to do since I've been with Kieri is become an instructor. So I'm a provisional instructor. I absolutely enjoy teaching, but I absolutely enjoy teaching CMMC one step above that and watching the light bulbs come on as we talk, or being challenged with questions that I may have not considered, situations. It's
Yeah.
just a blast.
That's my favorite part too. I love that. I love the new
And
scenarios.
the so I took it a step further. I had a couple hours of free time in the evening, and I decided to start working on my PhD. in cyber defense, and and now I pretty much become CMMC focused with that as well. So one of the things I identified was there's not much research related to CMMC because it's relatively new, so that makes sense. But there's a lot of unanswered questions and process improvement that we have the ability to affect in the ecosystem, especially the early stages that it's in. So, what better way to make the decisions than to have research related facts that we can get from
Yeah.
those folks? And so my research has really been focused on that. And,
Do
and,
you think
and that's what I say.
do you think that the DoD has any research that has? I mean, because we have some statistics in like the public inspection of the final rule, but like, do you think that this is something that the DoD is focusing on too?
I'm sure there's something back there. I just can't see it. There's,
Yeah, we have not seen. Yeah.
um, I know they've used some institutions like Carnegie Mellon and Johns Hopkins
Right.
for some of the guidance. But if they have anything in the background, I haven't seen the publications from it, and I use the standard tools that we have available: IEEE, Archive, Google Scholar, um, and ResearchGate. There's a lot of tools out there that have the ability to search. So if they're doing something that's um, collectively held within the Department of War, then I just haven't seen
Right.
it.
Yeah. Yeah. The contract related back end nuances that we wouldn't have access to in the first place. I I guess I'm curious. I mean, obviously you're in the middle of all this, right? I don't know where you are stage wise in your PhD, but and in that research that you're doing for your PhD. But is there anything interesting that you'd like to share? Because I'm kind of interested now that you mentioned that you're kind of focusing on the gap of research that's out there.
Sure. I just published research through IEEE for um, potential gaps in sampling methodology, right? And I think one thing that that I've been concerned with, I can't speak for anybody else, but one thing I've been concerned with is that there is guidance on how to perform a sampling. It's in the NIST 800 SP 800 171 Appendix D for
Focused. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
right, right, but it's very general,
It is.
and there's some other guidance out there, but it's when I say guidance, there's the training we do for CCAs and CCPs, but also that only talks about adequacy and sufficiency. However, that was based on a cap that is no longer, it was a draft version, never published. Um, and again, doing the training, what I've identified is we really focus on training CCAs and CCPs how to understand the requirements, and that's important, right? But there's not much to bring the teams together on what sampling should look like,
Yeah.
and and there are other frameworks that do that well, but it's not involved in this. Now there are some ways that the Department of War can't predict everything. They're doing their best. The Cyber AB's initiated a couple endeavors to make things better, and it's being worked. Um, but I think one of my main concerns was that if I have an assessor here, an assessor down the road, are they going to see the same evidence and get to the same results? If there's 100 things to look at, is one person going to look at one person going to look at 100? And that's what my research ended up indicating was that um, out of this, there was of the participants, we had results all over the board, right? So there was
Oh my goodness.
one assessor would look at one thing because that's considered adequate and sufficient in their eyes, and then another assessor indicated that they would look at 100%, right? So, and then it was all in between the spectrum, and some were really thoughtful with risk based approach. If I look at something that's maybe a standard user, I have a number of accounts that I look at or a percentage versus if I have a privileged user that if that is unauthorized access would cause a lot more trouble. So it was a whole spectrum in between.
Right. And I'm assuming there's nuances with even semantics within the controls that impact this. Like for example, the very first control, you know, and again, I know you can't consult, but like I've seen different. I've seen one assessor totally be fine with an export from Active Directory act as the authorized user list because it wouldn't be in there if it wasn't authorized. So it's technically authorized, but have no relationship with an onboarding process, have no relationship with an authority saying, yes, you, I agree that this is an account that should exist in our system. Like you see what I'm saying? Like there's variance with what people even mean by the word authorized. And it's like, how does that impact that research, like, and that variance and that view? I've seen it happen twice now, like two totally different views.
So that is one of the reasons why I um, and strive to be an instructor. And one of the things I
Right.
really enjoy about it is because that is where we can really get in front of how assessors assess. And just for that example alone, there's some of the things that Cyber AB has initiated through the rule, or not Cyber AB, but the proposed rule put in place to kind of affect that is the experience requirements for CCPs and CCAs.
Mm,
And there is a significant experience requirement, but understanding the why of what we're doing is really imperative.
yeah.
And so, for example, if we understand that bad guys get into systems and modify things, they modify privileges so they can go modify other things without you knowing, well, then maybe you would understand the importance of having a segregated or separated authorized thing to validate that
Yes.
Entra ID or Active Directory environment, right? And because you understand that if I may look at this, it may change tomorrow, and unless I have that baseline to look
Yeah.
at, I'll never know. I'll never know. And it happens
Yeah.
all the time. I read these stories every morning.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like it's hard to not look at it like that. If you're looking at NIST 800-171 or any ISO 27001 or the SOC 2 common criteria and the trust services like categories, like if we're looking at cybersecurity frameworks as simply a means to mitigate risks, if you're not assessing the control or implementing in the control where you're at least considering what is the risk that this control exists to mitigate in the first place,
Right.
how can you truly implement that control? I've written a couple blogs even here recently, like 31316, right? It doesn't mention cryptography. That's the vast majority of the way that data at rest is being encrypted. But what's the risk that 31316 exists to mitigate? And that's why physical safeguards can supplement where encryption isn't in place or FIPS validated for that. You see what I'm saying? Like, if you're not asking yourself, why does this control even exist in the first place? How can you truly know that you actually implement it? And that's kind of how we at least approach it from a consulting perspective when we do help MSPs and other OSCs try to figure it out.
Right. That kind of brings me to that phrase, security versus compliance.
Yeah. Uh-oh. Don't start down that road, Logan.
You know, so I with teaching, again, one of the things that I really enjoy about it is getting out in front of the thought process of what we're doing, and
Yeah.
then being able to speak of, all right, so this is what it says, but why does it say it? And then the resources. One thing I really promote is especially in this data on 171, there's a lot of resources and references that it provides for the understanding of secure architecture or destruction methodologies, and those are standards that are recognized. Now, a lot of them, it doesn't say shall perform in accordance with, but it
Right.
says you definitely should use this as a reference of understanding why this even exists.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and so understanding the why of what you're doing is really important. I'll give you another example. Um, if you look at, and I think this one's kind of lost a lot. And if you had Ryan Bonner on recently, I know he's one of those subject matter experts on this too. But
Mm.
if we look at media labeling, label media in accordance with the regulations and rules, and
Right.
well, what is that? What is that regulation? What is that rule?
384, I think it is.
Well,
384.
let's go. What is that rule? I mean, it's 32 CFR Part 2002 that tells you how to mark things, right? It tells you who's in charge of marking. It tells you where to go to how to mark it,
Yeah.
right? And that's such a large and impactful um, rule, but it's not really stated specifically in there. So how do you know how to validate or implement that control or that requirement without
Right.
understanding what that regulation is? And oh, and by the way, when you go look at that ECFR for 32 CFR 2002, what it doesn't show you is the 100 pages of preamble that were into the thought process of why everything was condensed down into a few pages of a rule. So now I go to the Federal Register version that has all that preamble in there and the discussion points and what they were thinking. and that can really help an assessor be able to go, all right, now I understand. I'm not way over in RMF land. I'm not way over into SOX land. I'm right where I need to be in CMMC land. And
Mhm.
so that's, again, following the string, becoming the subject matter expert as what we do for implementers and assessors is important.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's so interesting. I can't stop thinking about what you said about just your research is showing that everything that we're experiencing anecdotally of just having different interpretations is actually, maybe it sounds like it's maybe going to be brought to light, which is what I can hope for. That's all I can hope for.
So so that, I think that those results will be short lived, and here's why: is um, there's an ISO standard that's about to be implemented, right? The 17020 for inspection bodies, and ultimately C3POs over after a period of time must be accredited this ISO standard.
Right.
And that ISO standard has a sampling procedure or a sampling requirement that the C3PO must use, right? So what I see, and we'll go back to the why of it, right? So why is the sampling and the understanding of how that sampling is occurring important? It's so we can,
Yeah.
first of all, get an adequate confidence as an assessor that we have validated the things are being met. But also, if there's a legal incident or something that down the road where it's required to be redone, and again, that's why we hash the evidence and have a list of what we looked at, then we can rebuild, we can come to the same conclusion, the same results using the same information. And so we're not there currently, I don't believe. But I think with ISO standards, it will get there. And here's the differentiator though, and is that the C3POs under ISO, from what I've read so far, are not required to have the same sampling methodology. They're just required to have a sampling methodology.
That they
Right.
follow. It's
Right.
standard for them.
Right.
Interesting.
So
I didn't
and
know that.
so that may mean that if I'm with a C3PO and I try to recreate the results with another C3PO standards, I may not come to the same conclusion. However, if I'm using that same C3PO's quality management, I should.
You should.
I
And I
should.
guess I guess that will be, we talk about market differentiators and stuff all the time, but maybe that will be a market differentiator, is the better C3PO is going to have the better standard that produces a more, you know, consistent result. If you were to assess the same data, even with different team members, if you were to assess the same data, the amount of variance between, regardless of the team members, in that C3PO following that procedure for sampling and assessing, yeah, I guess that makes sense, and that would bode well for that C3PO to do that well, right? Have you guys started thinking about how you're going to approach that, or what's the? I know I haven't started talking about Kieri yet. That was the next thing I wanted to ask you about, but you guys already prepping for that?
Of
Yeah,
course, we're thinking about everything all the time.
everything
There's
all the time, baby.
everything all the time. Everything all the time.
Yeah,
And that, yeah, absolutely. We've been working on the ISO readiness, and we're expecting to go through that here in a few months. But
awesome.
what I do think, so eventually it's going to be, it's going to be standard, right? Your ISO, or you're not a C3PO. Your ISO 1720 accredited through the Cyber AB, or you're not doing the function. Um,
Hmm.
but I think where the positives now of having an ISO standard is that the OSCs understand that they're in competent hands, right? They're going to come
Right,
to a organization that is ISO certified, which means that their inspection processes are reliable, consistent, and repeatable, and
right,
they've been recognized as that by an
right.
accreditation body.
Yeah, they've been assessed against, their procedures have been assessed. Yeah, that makes sense. So tell me a bit about Kieri's history. I want people to know Kieri's stake in the game. So if you, I know that you weren't there at the founding. Obviously, Amira found you, which I was going to ask you. Maybe answer this too. What was it that Kieri saw, or Amira, excuse me, saw in some of the stuff you were doing on LinkedIn and your history and stuff that made her reach out? And then yeah, tell us about Kieri.
Okay, all right. So,
I know, two wildly
uh,
different conversations.
so Kieri's been around for nearly 10 years. I think 2017, Amira founded it.
Okay.
What I'm not certain is that if she intended to be a C3PO at that time, but she was one of the first the companies. Kieri was one of the first companies to become a C3PO,
Yeah.
and it was, I think it was right at that cusp of CMMC 1.0 to 2.0, and
Yeah.
she, if I can, if you want to tell you a little bit about the products that we have or what we offer, I
Yeah.
can
All
talk.
that. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so because I think that plays a big part in the history.
Yeah.
Um, this is not a sales call, but
All
the
good.
so she did it by herself, right? And it's a lot of work to. And if you think about the CMC 1.0, it was really focused on procedures, uh, again, compliance versus security, right? And in order to get through that successfully, your processes and procedures, policies, all that documentation really needed to be 100%. And so she developed her internal policies and processes, and they made sense, and got through a level 2 assessment. And one of the things that they offered, because at the time, it was really hard for C3POs to be C3POs because there was no work, right? Unless you were actively involved, and there's some were very heavily involved with the DIBCAC Joint Surveillance Voluntary Assessments, the
Yep.
JSVAs. So
Which
C3POs
was
had.
at like the first or something, right? With that we kind of
We,
collaborated on. Yeah.
yeah, we had a few. There were some C3POs that were, again, really just dug into it, and they did well.
Yeah.
Um, and but so C3POs had to be creative, or they were out of the game. And we did see that where some C3POs just said, I can't do this anymore. I can't afford this business, right? Because there's an environment we have to keep up, the compliance efforts we have to keep up. So Amir, being creative, said, well, wait a second. These policies and procedures outstanding, right? I got through a level 2 assessment. So, we had a compliance documentation package, and it eventually moved into some, architecture package for businesses, right? And what I really appreciated, again, just the way Amir approached it was she wasn't scared to say, this is not for you. I don't think this is right for your company based off of what you're telling me. I was like,
Mm.
that's weird, right? Is that marketing? Is that sales? How does that tell?
Yeah.
It was just being a truthful, good, ethical person,
Yeah.
right? And just, again, just glued me to this company even more. Um, so we provided that. We provided consulting for CMC readiness, and throughout the levels. So that's what kept us going. And again, I think between Amira and the work we did, we got a reputation. So when level 2 assessments became applicable in
Right.
January of last year, we were already, again, functioning as an organization. Uh, and beyond that, again, the ability to grow and adapt to what we need as an environment, and folks wanting to be a part of the brand, the part of the culture, has helped us continue to thrive. Beyond that, we have those products we do. They're good, and then we have consulting that we do, and they're smart. And then we have CMC assessors, and they're good at what they do. But one of the things I really love about us as an organization is that we collaborate well, right? And as we bring on board people, that's one of the things we really look for is what kind of personality do you have, right?
Yeah.
Your
Culture. Yeah.
culture, right? Absolutely important. And that's something I really learned in the military is that culture makes or breaks an organization. And so we're really, we
Yeah.
really look at who we're bringing on board and make sure they're the right fit for the people we have on board and the culture we want to be and who we want to grow into, because that can change quickly. And we want to be a positive shining star in the ecosystem, right? We want to do right things, continue to make right decisions, and be able to communicate. And so again, we have a few instructors in the organization now. We have four instructors.
Wow.
Yep. And then I think we're at 26 assessors or CCA, CCP leads total, and then the back end organization. So we've grown quite a lot, but we meet every week as a huge group and just throw ideas at each other and throw situations and scenarios. And like, well, how would you handle this? And how would you look at this differently? And so it's like we're continuing in that instruction instructional class, right, where we're continuing to grow and understand
Yeah,
how we can look at things differently from as an assessor, or how we can approach things differently as a consultant, and then we tie that back to our products too. So
that's awesome. Yeah, I love that. We have a very similar culture, man. We love that. Just this openness to collaborate, this like debate, even cordial debate, even, I don't see it that way. Well, I do, and here's why. And being able to just go back and forth until we all grow together.
right,
That I don't think you can have a better culture. I really don't.
right.
At least not in the context of work.
Right. Well, actually, I wake up happy to go to work. Then
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I've worked for companies where you just don't want to go. And then, yeah, this is not that. That's awesome to hear. I'm glad. So, I mean, so you would say that, um, obviously Kieri's making big strides. What are there any announcements for any new products or new things that Kieri's coming out with, new uh, ways that they're approaching things, new streams of revenue that you guys are going to try to pursue, or you guys have found your niche and you're going to just excel in that?
I mean, so with what we have now, we're going to continue to excel in what we
Yeah.
have, and just make sure that we always fit what what the organizations need, right? So it really depends. If you tell us that if an OSC comes to us on the consulting side and says, "Well, we really need somebody focused on this, and we need them for this amount of time," all right, do we have that? Is it worth investing to? Do we, just any kind of business growth? But we're really trying to support the organizations. At this point, it's really kind of straightforward, right? CMMC level 2. That's I need to get there,
Yep.
and then we have a diverse background of folks. We have the military, we have manufacturing, DIB, the whole conglomerate that we can kind of communicate back and forth with. We're really working towards being ready for Rev 3 here shortly, to be able to get that documentation out and support and work to develop um, a crossover from Rev 2 to Rev 3. I think
Right.
that's going to be the next huge hurdle, because it's not the same beast. The requirements aren't the same. It's not written the same.
No.
It is using the English language, but that's about it.
Yeah. The ODPs are a big deal. People don't really think so. I mean, we have the assessment objectives, so there's in a sense there's ODPs, but just having syntax of controls being different, that affects a lot of documentation. So,
Absolutely, and we hear something I hear all the time, and it's accurate. Is that CMC is not an audit; it's an assessment, right?
right.
And a lot of other compliance frameworks is that thing 6 feet from that thing? Yes, pass. No, do not pass, right? And CMC is not like that the way it's written in its current form in Rev 2. So did the organization define a way of doing something or identify things? Yes, they did. Did they do it like they defined it? Yes, they did, right? And then we can, unfortunately, we have to infer a couple things like, what breaks that timeline? Well, let's go to NIST on their identification of periodic, right? 12 months, right? So,
Right, right. Yeah.
so, but that's again, we have to work together for that knowledge base. Rev 3 is, so I wasn't involved in Rev 3 at all, right? But reading it is basically my understanding, the way it looks on the outside, is that the the Department of War. I'm not speaking on behalf of the Department of War. Again, this is just what it comes off
Yeah,
as,
your thoughts, yeah.
right? Is that they wanted the DIB to succeed, and at that point, the DIB, again, we're looking at back a few years when they wanted to implement 800.171, is that the DIB at this point probably doesn't have any way of protecting confidentiality, right? They're not doing the thing. So how do we get them from nothing to something? Well, we have to make it where uh, it's applicable across the board, right? Again,
Yeah,
the
super
5%.
accessible. Yeah.
Yeah, can a multinational organization, who we absolutely depend on, and implement it just as well as that 5-person mom and pop shop. And that's the way Rev 2 is. And I think that's what makes it so complicated as an assessor, as an implementer. However, if we look at Rev 3, so just an example, in Rev 2, the potential is, I could set a timeline for 3 weeks, and that's good enough, right? Because I said 3 weeks, and I do 3 weeks, right? And whatever that thing is,
Yep.
whether it's reviewing something or canceling something, removing a device, whatever it is, then we go over to Rev 3, and I think at this point the Department of War has said, all right, maybe we made it a little bit too loose. make it 15 minutes, make it 24 hours, right? And I think
Right.
that's going to be, it's going to feel like a kick in the teeth to most of the OSCs who are shocked just that they even had to do
Yeah.
that function in the first place.
16 character passwords is going to be a big deal for Enter ID. I'll just say that right here. What are we going to do?
Right? It's better than one, right? So
Hey, that's true. That's true. But
where's that middle line?
yeah, yeah, I agree. I think the Rev 3 thing is going to be, um, if I had to guess, I'll put it like this: if I had to guess if there were going to be any hiccups with the transition to Rev 3, I would probably say that even at the DoD level, there are going to be hiccups. I don't know how you get from 14 families, 110 controls, 320 objectives to, sure, 97 controls, but 37% increase in assessment objectives, and there not be hiccups with the supply chain. I just don't know how you. I mean, we're already talking about the bottlenecks of OSCs being ready for Rev 2 assessments. I just I don't want to be skeptical or negative for any, like, I don't want to be that person, but I'm also want to be a realist. I mean, do you agree? Like, do you feel like it's going to be problematic trying to transition to Rev 3? Because it's also going to be a rulemaking thing, right?
Right. There's a lot of things that have to happen before Rev 3
Right.
goes into effect.
And we're talking about GSA now. Like, I don't know what your thoughts are on. I'm writing a blog right now about the GSA update, just more of a deep dive than the high level, posts that we've seen here and there about it. It's a big deal. Like, it's a huge deal, and a lot of contractors are both GSA contractors and DOW contractors. So you're already going to see DoD contractors having to, pull their hair out over this earlier than maybe what the DoD through rulemaking would have to do. I mean, what are your thoughts about Rev 3 and GSA and the extra stuff that GSA is pulling? I don't know if you've had a chance to really look into that much, but it's a big deal.
I did not peruse it. I did not read it word for word,
Got
but
it.
I've got the gist of it, and it's going to be complicated. And again, where we stand, we're just a big overall picture, right? If you take a look at how many OSCs probably should have gotten through level 2 now, how many are going through that, and they're really focused on level 2, right? So I'm sorry, no,
100%.
Rev 2, level 2, Rev 2,
Yeah.
and some are even now having to start focus on level 3 of that, right? So to introduce another way of doing things, it's going to be difficult. And I think again, the subject matter experts out there, the ones of us that are doing this for 40 to 60 hours a week, are the ones that are going to make a difference on identifying ways to make this happen.
Yeah.
Because I understand all the sides. The Department of War wants to protect their information. Right? We're tired of our adversaries coming up with planes that look just like ours. Right? We don't want a submarine that pops up looking like the Columbia class should.
Hmm.
That's important. But again, how do they do that in such a way? And to not do anything is not an answer. Um, so I think
It's just hard work. We got to prepare for hard work. I mean, that's all. That's it, right? That's the answer. Is we gotta just see. I know that. I mean, the whole reason why Rev 3 exists is because somebody did the hard work of analyzing modern risks and trying to, you know, develop that framework, as an update to address modern risks. Even though obviously there's back and forth about did it do a good job of doing that. But it doesn't matter. Somebody did the hard work of doing that, and now we need to do the hard work of getting it implemented. It's just, I agree with you. I think it is going to be complicated, and I think cooler heads are going to have to prevail on this one. And I think there needs to be some way. This is just my gut reaction to a lot of it, is because I don't see how we don't have hiccups and don't have problems, don't have misunderstandings like we've always had in this industry. We just need to have some grace. Like, we need to have, like, I don't know, and I know that's more of a hot take for this industry, because some would say we've had nothing but grace in this industry. But I just don't see how companies, our supply chain is going to be absolutely destroyed if we don't have, you know good faith grace induced efforts to get there. I don't know how we do it. And the other thing about GSA is, it's a similar problem to the claim that we've had the requirements since 2017, that you hear all the time, which is in some ways true and in other ways totally not true. I mean, the GSA, the IT procedural guide, doesn't have any it doesn't have any way for the reader to understand scoping aside from the main two things that we would understand as CUI assets and security protection assets. It doesn't have any allowance for specialized scenarios. It doesn't have any allowance for, from what I read, it doesn't have any allowance for like the CRMA concept. It doesn't have anything like that. So it's kind of like we're back at square one with the lack of scoping guidance. So it's, again, I don't know how we do this without some grace and patience and just working with people.
Right. There's a lot of folks out there that are trying to do great things and maybe not have the communications, and we see that in the DIB too. There's organizations that are really working hard on CMMC, and if they just talk to each other as a prime and a sub, they may actually resolve a lot of the conflicts that they're having at readiness. Right? And
Yeah.
so, what we're having in the CCA, CCP ecosystem of that constant communications, and hey, how would you do this? How do you see this? What's your perspective? I think that would really help the DIB out if they had that same kind of um, ecosystem.
Yeah. That'd be a good idea. Hey, you should tell somebody that, you should tell somebody about that. Hey, you've got some ties, Mr. Navy man. Get
But,
somebody going on that.
yeah, and so that's the problem we see a lot of the times, and I'm sure most people have already heard this, is that the communications and the understanding of expectations sometimes is that pipeline is broken, right? So,
Mm.
when we talk about CMMC, it's cybersecurity maturity model certification, right? So IT, well, IT doesn't deal with contracts. How do they even know what they're required to do, right? Is IT working with CUI? No, right? So now they have to go engage people that they probably wouldn't talk to from the inside that cold server room,
Yes.
right? So that, are the right people engaged in these projects? Are these communications happening? I know we talk about, and then you bring it up, and again, it's posted sometimes. I think it should be discussed in an intellectual, like let's converse on why this is happening, right? Let's talk about NIST SB 800 171 being a requirement from those contracts, right? Well, it's easy to say, but how many DFARs and FAR clauses are in those contracts, right? Does that contract,
Have
does that
you
contract,
read a contract?
right?
Have you seen how many there are?
I've seen some crazy stuff. I've even seen websites that just say, go pick pick the applicable one and make it part of what you do, right? So, okay, well, that one costs $1 million and that one costs $2 million. Well, that's 500,000, right? There's no cost associated with that, right? So in
Mm.
some cases, when they accept these contracts, they're not understanding that the contractors, and we're going back in time, right? I'm sure there's more
Right.
familiarity with the requirements now, but they may not be understanding of what they're actually accepting when they take those contracts,
Oh,
right? So now
100%. Yeah.
now let's go digging what those are, right? So let's just say I've read every DFARS clause in that contract, right? So 7012, or I got to do some 171 stuff. I read 171. There's 110 things in there. All right, moving on. I do make sure my folks are authorized. I promise, right? Okay, that's met. All right, now let's go 7019. I got to have a SPUR score. A SPUR score. Is there any requirements? No, I just got to have a SPUR score, right? Negative 50. Okay, let's moving on. Got that, right? And right, yeah, I get the contract. All right, perfect. I got the contract, so therefore I must be doing it right, right? So that's kind of going back to the old saying, don't inspect or don't expect what you don't inspect, and that's kind of what got us here, and why CMMC is in place, right? Because that's somebody was like, oh wait, there is that saying, don't expect what I didn't inspect, and
Yeah.
it's painful, but it's correct in itself.
Yeah.
Now we talk about supply chain, but if we look at numbers, if we go back into that preamble of DFARS, I'm sorry, 32 CFR 170, and I believe it had somewhere on the number of 87,000 contractors that should be seeking level 2 certification. It was in somewhere in that 80 to 90,000. Not sure the exact
Yeah.
single digit.
I forgot what it was too, but it's up there. It's up there for
Well,
sure.
then go look at the preamble for the DFARS that came out for 7021, and then increased almost like 35,000 contractors that are expected to see level 2 certification. it's I think 118,000 that are expected to seek level 2 certification. Right. So we talk about the supply chain issues, and this is what I expect to see is that, wait a second, I didn't expect that person to meet CUI. I didn't even realize that I was handing that CUI down. Right. What about the mom and pop shops that are even more mom and pop shoppy, where they're doing chrome plating for something, or they're providing something very small. However, there's some aspect of CUI that's being flowed down to that sub subcontractor to the 40th tier down, trying to develop something, and I think that's, again, this is my opinion. This is that when we started pulling the string on, all right, I understand it needs to be flowed down to subcontractors. How far does that string go, right? And if you look at some of the supply chain for the defense industry, it goes overseas, right? A lot of it. It looks like a tree, and the U.S. is the bottom of the branch, right? And everything else is rooted out into the rest of the world, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's where it's going to start getting sticky. Is how's the defense industry going to navigate who's actually building this stuff that they may have not paid attention to before?
Yeah. Yeah. I was talking, I said this to Ryan too. I was told a while ago by Ozzy, Ozzy, you know, he knew a contractor, a prime or a contractor that was part of a big, big contract where he said it was like the prime had like 9 to 10,000 contractors in the supply chain. Like it was a huge contract, a huge contract. But yeah, it was something like I can't remember, like 9 to 10,000 contracts. It was like just absurd amount. So
Right.
it's like, how are we going to keep track of all that?
All
uh,
right. To ask Sarah to start making phone calls, we got to just validate that everybody has the DFARS in their contract.
yeah. Just slap that bad boy in there. No redactions, nothing. Which I think Ryan made a good point that the whole redaction hope is just dead in the water. Like there's no point in even thinking that is going to be a reasonable approach, and people just need to be ready for it.
What's the redaction? Just if you would refresh my memory.
So like you know reducing actual CUI content in a document, or you know um, declassifying, not declassifying, but decontrolling the data, which the authorized holder could have the potential to do.
Right. So along those lines, again, 32 CFR 2002, a really good source for anybody who's listening
Yeah.
that may not be familiar with the terms. Um, the decontrolling, right? It's with the basically the person who created this UI has the
Right.
authority, right? So um, there's very clear guidance on what that can do. However, what I think what I, what I, what I've observed is that the contractors again may have not taken that in consideration before, right? They just knew I have a spur score, I have this in my contract, I flow this down, but they because of they didn't really reconcile the cost of implementation. Is that they looking for efficiencies, right? So again, the concern is if I you can't just take a label off of something and say, right, now this is good, pass it down. But
Yeah.
if I remove the CUI, if I understand what the CUI is, and again, by the way, this is a conversation that needs to happen and is typically not happening,
It's
right?
not
Because
happening. And
right,
that's what Ryan is saying. It's not happening. We
it's,
probably don't
and,
need to anticipate it ever will happen.
well, it's not happening because of, in my opinion, I think there's a little fear in this, right? I am making money through this contract. If I go back to them and ask them to do extra work for me, or if they disagree with what my request is, or if they think I'm not handling this appropriately, there may be 12 other businesses out there that will do it better, right?
Mm,
So a lot of times it's just having to take the risk of having the conversation, right? And it's a simple conversation in most cases that I've observed, and the ones that I've worked with that have had that conversation, we're like, well, that was easy. Yeah, it was easy. You just got to communicate early and often, right?
mm.
There are attorneys out there that will help you, that will help organizations work through this too, right? To make sure they're making sound decisions that can be called, if they're ever called into question, they're like, well, I did my due diligence to make sure I was using the right information. Here's the feedback that I got, that this would not be CUI. Therefore, we did this process, right? And so how do you get to that endpoint? You just got to,
Yeah.
again, talk to the right people and make sure you're making the right decision. Because what are the cost savings as a contractor if I take that CUI out of there and I don't need to pass it to my sub? How much does that save me in contract costs? Because I'm going to absorb a cost if I require them to take on these defarce clauses and these
Right.
FAR
Their
clauses.
bids are going to be higher on the work. Yeah.
And, and here's the big picture is that will all get incurred by the government, which will get paid for by the taxpayer.
We're paying for it anyway. Yeah. So why not save yourself a little bit of the corporate headache? Yeah. No, that's a good perspective. I agree that it should happen. I think the skeptic in some is just that will anybody ever get over that fear, to use your terminology, or laziness to use other people's perspective on that issue. But no, I think that's a good perspective. I want to change topics really quick, because I this
So,
is one I really wanted to make sure I got to while I have you. Um, you've been uh, in the trenches here. We were about 4 months into this first phase, right? About 3 or 4 months into this thing. Um, if there is anything, now that you've been having to use the current version of the cap for that period of time, and you guys are kind of slammed, right? You're constantly assessing, you're constantly learning. Well, if you had the ability to change anything in the cap, what would it be? Like if there was anything in the normal way that you're required to do things that you have found to be a hindrance better more than a help, what would it be? Anything that you could change? I'm just curious to pick your brain on that.
hmm, hmm.
You gotta have something. I know you have something.
I do, but so I'm part of that process that's
Yeah.
helping, and so I just have to be careful with what I say.
Right. Right. Sure.
The And when I say part of the process, the Cyber AP has developed subcommittees to
Committees. Yep.
take the feedback of the ecosystem and make things better. Right? They're really taking their input, and it's a lot of input. And the subcommittees are working through a lot of feedback to make sure it's whatever we generate and recommend through the Cyber AP to the Department of War for publication, either through a body of knowledge or CAP improvements or updated whatever guidance. That doesn't confuse the ecosystem even further. That's the worst case scenario, right? Where let's get.
Yes.
I'm here to help. So I think the what I overall the CAP served its purpose as an initial document to get things going and get a baseline, right? And you don't know what you don't know until you don't know it, or you know that you don't know it, and that's
Right.
where we are with the publication of that, and the the general guidance in there of it may I think there's just some wording that was maybe confusing and has um, rightfully caused feedback that is being addressed, right? So, I think some of the things that may have been kind of disappeared out of there is adequacy and sufficiency. But again, was that good enough? Maybe not, right? Maybe we need to direct folks to do something else. But and throughout this process, what we should focus on doing is not tying hands, right? We already have another process to do that. We have the ISO for Cyber AP, for the C3POs to develop their own things, right? Things that work and will get evaluated on their own instance. And so we just have to be careful on CAP improvements where it doesn't cross over into other things where there's
Mhm.
immediate conflict on how processes work or understanding. So again, kind of answering your question, kind of not. I think the CAP serves its purpose in providing guidance in phases. I think there's room for clarification. Cyber AB is working on that now. One thing I think it did well for knowledgeable CMMC professionals is instead of providing um, more restrictions in a lot of cases, it points to another reference, right? So it'll point to the 32 CFR, it'll point to ISO and say,
Yep.
do things in accordance with that.
Yeah.
And that's really good for revision control because as we've seen from just cap updates or rules, uh, if they change, it's going to be months and months and months before that other thing changes. And if there's a conflict in those two uh, regulations, we're stuck. Now we're stuck, and we're going to work off of memos and town halls, and it's just going to be a show, right? So again, I think it serves its purpose and its baseline. I think
Yeah.
there's always room for improvement. Now, here's where I think it might go wrong, and where it gets a little bit of the error codes start popping up, is for folks that don't do CMMC for 40 plus hours a week, and they pick up the cap. They may not understand any of that. They
Mm-hmm.
may not understand, what's the difference between framing and scoping and the pre-assess or the preliminary phase versus validation of scoping in the pre-assessment phase, right?
Yeah.
Where if I am failing an assessment, can I turn it into a mock assessment? Well, is there a process to do that? Is there a procedure to do that? Right? The cap doesn't really talk about those things. But again, how would we have known until we got to the point where we're experiencing these things? I'm sure if we put enough people in the room, we would have figured it out. But also, I don't know if you ever put more than 10 people in a room to try to make decisions or guidance. It doesn't go well, and it lasts a long
At least not with very opinionated people.
time. So, I think it's serving its purpose currently. I think there's room for improvement. I think there's a process that's being
Right.
implemented for that improvement, and then there's some really smart CMMC folks that are looking at it. And
Yeah.
and I'm willing to bet that even when that comes out, there's still going to be whole scoped into it. But the CMMC assessment process has not been around for 40 years. It's been around for one 13
Yeah.
months, 15 months.
Officially, right? Yeah.
Right?
100%.
The way we do business right now was published in December of 2024. We started being able to use the cap, after significant reading of it, in January of 2025. And again,
Yeah.
I think we're under less than 1,000 assessments now. So we're working with the data we have.
Yeah.
I think the ecosystem is working with the data it has to make the improvements the best way it can. It's going to take time.
I definitely think some of the complaints or some of the issues that people are perceiving is from a perspective that doesn't remember, or it doesn't consider that, yeah, like you just said, the way we've been doing business in an official capacity has only been around for a little over a year. I mean, we're not it's not fair to really look at all of this as a 2020 or 2021 thing. A lot of that was draft. A lot of that was changed. A lot of that is not the same. I mean, for goodness sakes, it's been a year. Like, so I agree with you. I do think if people really were to look at this carefully, people would be they would feel more like, oh yeah, we're still in baby steps of this thing. We're still in the early years. Now, 10 years down the road or 5 years down the road, when we're looking back at, probably, Lord willing, this 800 171 Rev 3 has been dealt with and people are implementing that. And, we're figuring that out. Rulemaking's done for that. All the other things that'll come out of this, the ISO stuff for all the major C3POs that are going to stay in this industry, they've implemented those. So there's standardization and there's precedence and all this stuff. Probably more memos. If we look back and we have some of the same concerns,
Right.
fair, fair. We can probably kind of reevaluate whether or not the criticisms are fair. But yeah, I agree with you. I think we've got a long ways to go before we've got all the precedent needed to be able to look at something and have a lot more confidence that, yeah, that's the way we need to do it every time, or whatever the case may be. So I agree with you.
Now again, I understand from the OSC's perspective. Hey, you're asking me to do this now. You should have all the kinks worked out. But it's just not. It's not. I
Yeah.
don't know. I don't think it's accomplishable unless there was ways to do it to bring on other frameworks and how to what were their lessons learned. I'm not certain that happened, but I may never know. But I think that's the best thing we can do now is we're going to learn from our mistakes, see how other things that may be um, similar to this ecosystem. How are they succeeding? What were their failures? Let's avoid that. Let's not do that.
Mm,
Bring in experienced folks to help them make decisions.
yeah. I to get back to the cap, I think the cap does a lot of really good things. So it's definitely a better, in my opinion, it's a better version than the one we use for the CCP and CCA training. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm thankful for it. Especially here with dealing with external service providers. I do have questions, and if I'm crossing the line into consulting, obviously you've been good about saying you got to be careful, but I do wonder if there is a little bit of an overreach when it comes to like security protection asset, like cloud service providers, that they're common tools, they're not storing, processing, transmitting CUI, but they don't have a CRM because they're servicing the commercial world. Like everybody's using them, like like an EDR tool that everybody's using. And so I feel like the cap in the 32 CFR kind of go a little too far in what it seems to want. And so we've really had to help juggle and work through that with OSCs to come up with approaches to, okay, they don't have one, but they have information that you can use to kind of build one that you can still cite and infer what your responsibility is versus theirs. And it's been an interesting ride where there's not been much clarity. I mean, do you feel the same way, that it's just been kind of awkward dealing with those weird one-offs where it's not a SaaS or it's not a cloud product or an MSP that's actually handling CUI or performing some human-based function where they're actually doing something, but still technically they have to have all this extra documentation that they traditionally wouldn't have if they were dealing with the just a SOC 2 assessment or something like that.
Right. Yeah. So I will say my expectations of a CRM, so the customer responsibility matrix, commonly referred to as a shared responsibility matrix,
Right.
is that if that external service provider, whether it's cloud or a not cloud, performing a security protection function, CUI function, protection function, is that CRM, if that external service provider is performing a security function uh, for the environment or sharing the compliance of a requirement, that it explains what they're doing, right? If they're not, if they're not performing a shared responsibility for that requirement, then there's nothing really to talk about, because then that's really the OSC saying, I do that.
Yeah.
So it's really up to the OSC, and every case is different, and there's a lot of environments we can go across, but how do you explain that as an OSC? I think that's one thing to focus on as well, right? So if
Right.
there's no shared responsibility if it's only OSC, then that seems simple, and that can be described in the SSP, right? And that's what it talks about. Show that responsibility matrix. There's a couple things about that too, right? Who really just the agreement, right? The agreement that it's occurring that way. It can look. We have a standard template that we're just trained on for shared responsibility matrices, and if you look at the FedRAMP Appendix J, it's very similar, right?
Yeah.
Here's the thing, here's what I do, here's what they do, right?
Right.
But I've seen it in other different styles.
Right.
Uh, as long as I, as the assessor, and by the way, again, I talk about this quite often. We focus on what the assessor is going to look at. The assessor only looks at it one week out of every 3 years. What
Yeah.
really who needs to understand is your team as an OSC. You have
Exactly.
to
That's the point
understand
of the SSP.
right? Right? If I was the OSC, I would draft an SSP where I could onboard somebody, put them through. Hey, you're getting paid. Here's your health insurance, all that. Now read this SSP. This is exactly what I need you to do and be responsible for. Right? We're gonna have a test at the end.
Mm.
Right? It's gonna be 320 questions. Right? So and if
And for security for the system.
right, and if you don't understand, actually go perform everything it says that you do. And if you don't know how to do that, let's talk about it. Let's get training. Let's figure it out, right? Or if you don't understand, or if you can't figure out how we get to the requirement, let's do that. And if some of that says somebody else does this, well, how do they do that? I don't know. Oh, okay. Well, let's figure that out, right? So now that
Yeah.
we come to the customer responsibility matrix, it should be talked about in the SSP and documented, and that shared responsibility.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point.
Now, I
I,
will say, there is confusion about this, and there's disagreements. There's conversations happening, and again, I think that's been pushed to Cyber AB to provide guidance in such as these cases that OSCs are like, we want to do the right thing. Please help. Please help us do the right thing.
Yeah,
And
please help us, because my tool provider, I sent them emails, they won't send me anything, and I would really prefer not. Like they're a great tool, they do awesome work, they just don't have this document called a CRM. Like, you know what I mean? Yeah. So I agree. I think it'll get all sorted out in the washer. Just it's one of those things that I've noticed as maybe we can get some help to get some clarification. I think we will. I agree.
right, right.
Um, Yeah. Go ahead.
Even with that, I think we've come a long way. I think the MSPs that want to be involved in the community have made the efforts to
Yep.
develop the product to help their clients. They want to keep that client. They want to grow their business in this community. So like, all right, what's the requirements? Let's figure it out.
Yeah. It's been awesome to see how many MSPs are diving in. We've actually been guiding our marketing and our involvement in conferences and all the public facing stuff towards a lot of it has really been just encouraging MSPs. Hey, jump in, they need you. So yeah, it's been really cool to see that MSP collective website get bigger and see other people join the fight.
Absolutely.
um, what do you think? I mean, I have a couple more things here. What do you think is something that if a lot of OSCs that are preparing for CMMC to get assessed and all that stuff. What do you, if you could tell them one or two things that are like the most common misunderstandings or most common things that hold up an assessment or cause problems during an assessment? You've probably been asked this a million times, but I'm going to ask it again. What would it be, and what should they do? I know you
Yes.
can't consult. I know you can't
No,
consult,
no,
but
no, no. I'm more than happy to talk about this because we see it a lot.
yeah.
Understanding as an OSC, what are your limitations? Understanding where are your knowledge gaps, and you may not know, and that's the first step is knowing that you don't know what that is, right? So
Mm.
do you have somebody you can work with that understands CMMC? As we discussed for the past, some time, is that it's complicated, right? There's wiggle room. You may have assessors coming from different backgrounds. We're working to fix that. We're working to make sure that education for the folks gets shored up, but that's still going to exist. I'm going to have somebody with 30 years of RMF experience that gets certified CCP and CCA and does great things with assessments, and they may see something different with Rev 2 than somebody who's been doing it 5 years with SOX. But however, they both meet the requirements, and those requirements are good enough, right?
Mm.
There's processes, appeals and all that stuff. If it ever comes to it, right?
Right.
And that's
Right.
why we also
Exactly.
have teams. We
We
have
have safety nets. Right.
we have a lead CCA also needs another CCA, right? And then beyond that, we have quality assurance, and so there's a whole process internally for C3POs to work through those difference in opinions as well. But knowing that that risk exists, what do you know as an OSC, right? Are you putting this effort all on your IT team? Does your IT team have CMC knowledge? Have they gone through a 40-hour course and understand what the assessor is going to see? Right? I mean, you wouldn't say you don't have any experience running to be an sysadmin. Yeah, let's run it anyway, right? You're going to do well. Probably not, right? So if you expect them to do well, train your folks to do well. Um, that's the preparation phase, right? And what I do commonly see though is the IT folks are getting burnt out as they become CMMC experts, right? So the burnout rate, CMMC expert rate, and then they become CMMC assessors. Hey, we could use you on our team. I'm sure you know a lot, right? You've been through it, right? But, but,
Yeah.
but that's what I'm commonly seeing is because
Yeah.
it's and so the first of all, I can understand your limitations, understand if you need help, understanding it's not just an IT problem, right? It involves
Mm.
HR, it involves legal, it involves your training department, right? If you're
100%.
using LMS, all these folks need to work together. It involves the people that are working with the CU on the floor. It involves the contracting team, right? So how are you coordinating that information? Now, if you're a 5-person team, again, that seems like a lot of people and it seems like a lot of work, and it probably is, right? So do you need outside help? And so again, understanding the gap where you exist and how to get from point A to point B, and for readiness. So beyond that, I think we've gone a long ways in understanding that as an ecosystem. But one thing I'll always say is know the rules of engagement, right? We've mentioned the 32 CFR 2002, 32 CFR 170, the CMC assessment scoping guide, and SAR 171, 171. I mean, like all these documents. By the way, the DoD assessment methodology, 312.4, the importance of that. However, you can't go one place and find it. Well, I take that back. You can go to the DoD or the Department of War CIO CMMC resources page, and you'll have all that documentation. Now, let's say you sit down 80 hours later, so for 10 business days, you may be done with it. You probably don't understand all of it, but there it exists, right? So those are the rules of engagement. Those are something that assessors should understand very, very well, and you need to make sure the team understands those as well, because those are the same rules you're going to be expected to play, right? Understanding what's expected. Let's just go to the cap, right? There's 5 phases, and understanding what to expect through each one of those phases, right? If you go through those steps and it talks about what the OSC should do you understand what that is? If it points to the ISO standard, do you know what that ISO standard is? So become familiar with that. If you don't have familiarity with those documents, or at least understand what you don't understand and need that knowledge gap closed, you're at a deficiency, right? You don't have a leg up to walk in, because there's some aspects of this, and even with all these documents I mentioned, where we're seeing a lot of the OSCs not make it past the preliminary phase.
Mm,
And that's because of just even the DoD assessment methodology, right? I think it's like in a subscript note of something else where this is used in the readiness, where that SSP, right? We cannot begin an assessment without an SSP that meets all the requirements of 312.4. It needs to have
right.
an SSP. It needs to be updated. It needs to describe your destination.
Non-starter.
Right? It's all the stuff, right? It needs to explain the requirements and how they're being met by you. Because so let's just say it's a compliance requirements. And sure, I've met the bare minimum. However, time is money, right? So when you walk in with a C3PO, you're paying for their assessment team, again, with all this knowledge to go and look at your environment and do a good job in a professional manner, and have a reasonable outcome as an assessor, right? So all these things you want to get a good product for your money. Um, but if you provide them an SSP that doesn't explain those things, they have nowhere to start, because that
Mm,
SSP for the assessor is going to be the roadmap of how they go through and identify and define everything in one day, and then how they ask you questions the next day, right? And the risk of not having all of again, I'll go back to 312.4, is if that isn't defined and described well, the assessment team may ask questions that don't matter, right? And now they're leading you through, you're leading your team to failure, because your team is asking questions or answering questions that don't matter, but they're the wrong answers, right? Or we're asking questions that we're not asking questions that do matter. And then when you have something going on down the road, well, why didn't you catch this, right? And now everybody's strings getting pulled. Well, because we didn't even know about it.
mm,
So becoming familiar with those documents, understanding the rules of engagement really affect how you start your assessment.
yep.
Um, I've heard recently, well, can we start an assessment if my SSP is written for Rev 3? No, we can't. We can't, because now the assessors are trying to formulate their own way of thinking about how what you're doing is meeting something else, and that's not right, because now
Right.
you're not
And it's
asking
not one to
questions.
one. Yeah.
Right? It's not. The assessors are now developing their ways of thinking, and you're not explaining it. So now we're assessing ourselves and our opinions, right?
Yeah.
Or an SSP developed off of 853. So again, we just can't pick that up and do it. It's
Right.
not the same language.
Right. Yeah, it's so important to stick with what's required right now. It's nothing wrong with getting ready for the future now, but make sure you have what's required right now for your assessment right now.
Right.
No, I totally agree.
So I
Um,
think just knowing where your gaps lie, that's the biggest one, and who to ask for help, right? And also, again, who to ask for help. I said it, but who to ask for help. Do your homework on who you're bringing on board, right? There's many different onboarding processes, but I've seen folks that have been through the very minimalist support team qualification, and they're not the same level as a CCP who's been through 40 hours of training and certification, or a CCA that can support your team with 80 hours of training and certification, right? Can you bring somebody on board to work internally that's already been through those processes, that
yeah,
has assessment experience? What's the value to that organization to pay for that support, either internally or externally?
I love it. Yeah, I think that's going to be helpful for people. I mean, people listen, please heed our words and get people that actually know what they're doing. And yeah, don't procrastinate, but also, yeah, know where you're falling short so that you can fix it and get the right people that can help you fix it. I agree. Um, Logan, I want to be cognizant of your time. Are you guys, what's going on in the next couple of weeks for you? I saw that you have you're speaking in Chantilly at NSI Impact. I saw that. So is some speaking stuff. What other hobbies are you working on other than smoking cigars, which I still haven't gotten a chance to do with you?
Well, I'm now a member of the Cigar of the Month Club, and there's a really great cigar bar down the street, and my
Oh,
wife supports me, and I love it. So,
yeah,
um,
we need to have one. We need to have one.
So I'll be with the National Science Institute in Chantilly, the Impact 2026. I'm going to bring with me another one of our my assessment team managers, Matt Alberts, a really smart fellow. And then I'll be speaking with the team on CS5. I believe that's in San Diego, maybe the week prior to that this
Mm.
year. So looking forward to being there. Are you going to be there?
I have a pregnant wife with twins, and it is going to be too close to when she's going to be kind of due. So I'm not going to any more. Like I said in the email, I'm not traveling anymore until she's recovered from having the babies.
That's right. Work to live, live to work. You have to make your choice.
I know. Hey, I'm going to miss you guys. That is one thing that is absolutely for sure, but it will be for a good reason.
I'll think of you when I'm lighting up. Actually, I don't even know if I don't even know I can light
Don't
a
even
smoke.
talk about lighting up.
I think they made me stand in the ocean when I smoked a cigar there last time. So,
Wait, where are you? Where are you based out of?
a little north of Jacksonville, Florida. So between Georgia
Okay,
and Florida and Jacksonville.
so
We're
it's not something I could just schedule a dinner or something. It'd be a little hard.
surprisingly when we came back from CS5 last year. When I got off the plane, I noticed that a lot of the folks that I work with on a daily basis were getting off the plane with me. I was like, oh, I didn't know we had other professional CMMC folks in the city. So it's been nice that I've been able to catch up with them for lunches and stuff like that.
Yeah,
It's more
man,
important.
I'd love to. I'd love to. We're gonna make it work. One day we'll make it work. One of these conferences we'll make it happen.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Well, Logan, I really appreciate you coming on. I think this has been really helpful and insightful, and I do hope people will be encouraged to keep pressing on and get this done and be wise about it. Where can people get up with you if they want to follow up with you or learn more about you guys at Kieri? What contact information can you provide?
So we have Kieri.com, and that's the website, and info at Kieri.com is probably the best way. And just if say what you need, and we'll make sure we talk to you, get the right person in the room with you to discuss whatever it is that you need to help you move through your CMMC readiness or assessment process. Beyond that, it's Logan Therrien on LinkedIn, and I'm more than happy to connect. I love talking about CMC. I connect in the academic world and professional world. This has kind of been my life for a while, and absolutely love it.
All right, Logan, we appreciate you, man. Thank you so much.
Yes, sir. Take care, Stephen.
Take care.